Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am, of course, the Script Doctor coming to you live in your homes or on your phones out there to help inform you things about writing, things about the industry, information that you probably won't really get anywhere else in this corner of YouTube. Um, and also just to see how you guys are doing and what possibly might be happening in the next few days when it comes to the unions striking some of the major studios in Hollywood land. And today we're going to take a fun little look at what the tentative agreement is, along with a couple of quick perusals of a very lengthy uh, minimum basic agreement that is going around now and is being voted on by the vast majority of the union. It looks to me like it's going to be accepted and ratified pretty soon. So let's see what this contract entails, and let's put to bed some of the crazy conjecture and rumors that have been spewed out by the trades, leaked by the studios, and see who was really the winners of this. Did this strike? Did the length of this strike garner any actual benefit to the people that were on strike? That is the question I want to pose. Um, Before I do, I want to say hello to everyone out there. I see we got Mihan here. He says, "Hey, gang." We got good old Adega Outlaw, a fellow writer, scribe, and a sci-fi novelist. Thank you for being here. I want to say hi to Josh Hammond, uh, Garrett Crowell, and of course, what's your first thought? Thank you guys for being here. Tim Tringle Jr., and of course, Apollome's Minion. How are you doing? I can't wait to see the next progress picture of your Kirk and Spock bead thing. I don't know what those things are called, but I recognize the art and I think those are really cool. And you're doing great with that. We also have John Cipolla here. I see your question. I'm going to address that in just a moment. Just want to thank all of you for joining me this morning. I'm going to try and keep this a little bit brief so that we can lead in, so that people have time to lead into the Midnight Edge in the morning show, if that is your thing as well. I just wanted to kind of get this out of the way and use it as a good reference in case we have some talking points coming up later on in the day or later on the week by other commentators. You guys can be a bit more informed so that you can actually see how screwed the WGA got or how screwed the studios became. We also have good old Scribe Light. Thank you, sir, for being here, as well as Black As. All right. So one of the questions or one of the statements we have, which I think is an important one to address, is from good old John, who says, "This just kicks the can down the road. They will be on strike yet again in 3 to 5 years." Well, there won't be a 5-year strike because these contract negotiations are in 3-year increments. The real question is, what is the proverbial can that is being kicked down the road? Some have contested its AI, some have contested its minimum staffing. What will it be? Having perused the 94-page document, as well as the other things I'll be showing you, it looks like there's some pretty interesting prohibitions going on when it comes to generative AI. And while I greatly assume that generative AI and AI in general will be will most likely be vastly different in the next 3 years, or maybe even sooner, I don't think the wording in the contract is going to be easily broken down or circumvented as of yet. So it remains to be seen. It remains to be seen, but it is not outside the realm of possibility, John. Well, I mean, 5 years, there's no way they're striking in 5 years. There's no reason for them to. 3 to 6 years or might be the case. Heck, might not be anything for 9 years. Who knows? Between the dawn of the internet and the web series that occurred in 2007, which instigated the strike back then, and now has been quite a substantial amount of time. And for those that are unaware, although the 07-08 deal was definitely contentious, one of the things that the writers did win is a bit more control over the internet and distribution, which gave them some foundation when it comes to these streaming shows, and why, when streaming kind of took off, there wasn't a strike that occurred then, because those bases were covered. It ended up being something of a blessing, and it's kind of a rarity in that case, given the fact that we're getting new technology all the time in our distribution. We also have a interesting question from Scribelight, who says, question for when you get to it. Does the solo scribe exception uh, to writers' rooms population mandates mean that multi-writer projects will be deprioritized going forward? That's a really good question. I think we might be able to find an answer to that in reading some of the summary page of the WGA. Let's start with the summary page before we get into the nitty gritty, because there is some significant legal language used. And while I'm pretty solid at translating it, sometimes I'm not always 100% on it. Oh, we got Jane Theory in the house. Hello, Jane. I miss talking with you. I hope you're doing well. And same for you, Mr. Tickle Trunk. Thank you for being here. And Fractal Brain as well. Zaku Zaki says, script must be a handsome guy. The mystery of glasses. Thanks. I don't often get handsome as a compliment for me. I get a whole bunch of other ones, but not handsome. John Doe asks a good question. If a series is 8 episodes and there are 18 months between seasons, is that really too much work for a single writer? We're going to get to that because and I can preface this right now. So in reading stuff with regards to the mini room or the minimum staffing of writers, it appears it only pertains to a mini room or a pre-greenlit room, which means that if you're a screenwriter working in television and you write an original pilot and you pitch it to the networks or cable and they pick it up, it doesn't appear that you are mandated for a minimum staff of that show. However, if the studios are generating a mini room or a pre-greenlit room, that usually means that they are looking for a show to develop in-house, or they have a show idea and they're looking to hire writers to develop it, which means that they are stipulated in forming a mini room with minimum staffing standards. And I think the tactic, and this might be what the actual intention was from the negotiating committee, because one of the things a lot of the writers don't like is the mini room because it does exploit the writers in an unfair way. Don't get me wrong, I am very much against compelled hiring or compelled numbers of staff on a show. But I think the tactic here was to make the mini room less desirable as an option for the studios to use so that they would go to the more traditional model. We also got Lester San Jose here. Glad to see you. And Josh Hammond has an interesting question. It's like, says, would it make sense if the writers' rooms in a series has more than 8 episodes, like 24 or so, even if the show is on streaming service and maybe spin off to more shows in that universe? Again, this is something that needs a little bit more clarification. We might start getting that soon. I know I have been up all night. I haven't been properly sleeping since Friday. But a lot of people have been asking questions. One of the big ones that came up Monday were more details in how does this work versus network cable and then streaming, or network cable show that starts there and then goes to streaming. Those things, emails have been sent out to WGA captains and leaders for more clarification, because the minimum basic agreement does cite other past stipulations of the general contract and general rules of the union, but sometimes the language is a little bit imprecise in that regards. But so it has to be done case by case. Holy cow, we've got nerd cookies here this morning. How are you doing, Elaine? Loving your lore videos, especially your recent Bene Gesserit connection to what Dave Filoni has co-opted of sorts. But let's get to the summary here. That's there we go. So let's get to the summary here. So this you can find on the WGA contract2023.org website. So I'm not violating any confidentiality agreements by perusing this for you. And let's go through some of the basic points. Now, bear in mind, guys, I only have one monitor, so I'm working in windowed mode. And in order for me to be able to read this, I kind of can't see the chat at the moment. So I apologize if I miss your chat. But if you do have questions, you can add them to me. You can super chat to me, but you don't have to super chat, of course. But it's always appreciated your listening and your involvement and your questions, because you guys ask really good questions. Another person who asks really good questions is George the Giant Slayer. My God, I love his questions because they come from a far more rational point of view than just knee-jerk reactions, and they're very insightful. It's been a spell since I've talked with him on a stream, but I can't wait to hear what his thoughts on this as well, because he's got good insight. So let's get into the summary of the 2023 WGA MBA Writers Guild of America Minimum Basic Agreement. So the following is a summary of the deal terms for the 2023 Minimum Basic Agreement. It is a simplified version of the Memorandum of Agreement, or MOA, which contains the full text of the new provisions. The language of the MOA controls in the case of any inconsistency with this summary. Unless amended in the 2023 negotiations, the provisions of the 2020 MBA remain unchanged, which means essentially the provisions that were agreed to 3 years ago were also agreed to with regards to this new contract. It's also something really something to also consider is that every 3 years a new contract is negotiated. Things that both parties agreed to from the previous contract that they want to remain will remain, and things that they want to be modified or changed will be under negotiation, maybe incorporated in. But overall, while there are similarities from contract to contract, they are basically considered brand new contracts and deals. So that is always something to consider in this case. So number one, we have the terms of agreement. So this contract will start from September 25th, so 2 days ago, and it will go all the way through May 2026, which means that by that time in May, they will have already started negotiating the next contract. And if that contract is good, it will be ratified, and business will continue as usual. If for whatever reason something does change that needs to be addressed and it causes an impasse between the AMPTP and the union, a strike might result. So there is a chance, always a chance, that in 2026 we might be back in this situation again. I hope that's not the case. I really do hope that some of the foolish nature, not just on the WGA side, but also on the studio side, won't carry over again. I hope they have brand new foolish problems to address that hopefully can be addressed in a negotiating room without the need of a strike. Crossing my fingers for that. I can't recall in the history of the WGA of multiple strikes happening every 3 years since its inception. So here's hoping that we continue the tradition of more consistent work and consistent fair negotiations for another almost generation without any strike again. But we'll see what happens. So here's something that's pretty fun. So we got minimum increases. And so these minimum increases are not just about the basics of having more money. It's basically having money to compensate for inflation and rising costs, especially in the state of California. So that's going to be something here. This is kind of a pretty solid win for the WGA. So most MBA, minimum basic agreement minimums, will increase by 5% on ratification of the contract, 4% in 2024, and 3.5% in 2025. In fact, I'm going to, after we finish this summary, I'm going to go to the actual deals where we can see the initial proposal, the studio's counteroffer, and then the result of what happened as from that counteroffer to see which side acquiesced. Next part, we have a pretty decent increase with regards to health and pension contributions. So the health fund contribution on reportable earnings will increase 0.5% in the second year of the agreement. So it goes from 11.5 to 12. The Guild has also the right to divert an additional 0.5% in each of the second and third years of the contract from various minimum increases to either the health fund or the pension plan. So depending on the need, that 0.5% can go in towards pension, or if health prices increase, it can go to the health fund. We have increased health and pension contributions for writing teams. So this is actually a big win for a lot of the writers, because previously, in certain situations, you weren't getting a whole lot if you're a part of a writing team. Right now, it looks like the studios have capitulated and said that each writer on a writing team employed for a script will receive pension and health contributions up to the relevant cap as though they were a single writer, rather than splitting the applicable cap. In addition, when a writing team is employed on a series, the contribution for each writer on the team will be made on the full weekly minimum instead of one half of the weekly minimum. So that's basically doubling it on by the week. That's pretty cool. Now we get into some of the really cool stuff, the artificial intelligence. And there's some more details on that, which I'm going to try and address quickly in this as we go. But right now, the WGA, with the agreement of the studios, have established regulations for the use of artificial intelligence, known as AI, on the minimum basic agreement covered projects in the following ways. So AI can't write or rewrite literary material, and AI generated material will not be considered source material under the MBA, meaning that the AI generated material can't be used to undermine a writer's credit or separated rights. Which means if I send a script to a studio, they can't rewrite it through AI and then try and cut me out of my compensation or residuals for that script. So that's a good protection for writers. It also goes on to say a writer can choose to use AI when performing writing services. That bugs me, but hacks are going to get something out of this. However, there's a double-edged sword to that, which we'll get to just in a moment. If the company consents and provided that the writer follows applicable company policies, but the company can't require the writer to use AI software, for example, ChatGPT, when performing writing services. So this allows AI control on the writer side as opposed to the studio side. And if the writer wishes to use AI, the studio has to have their own terms and conditions regarding that use. So that's interesting. That basically makes it unappealing for both the writer and the studio to use AI when you have those types of situations. The interesting aspect here is this third point. The company must disclose to the writer if any materials given to the writer have been generated by AI or incorporate AI-generated material. And finally, here's the double-edged sword part. This is one I actually kind of like because I think it can screen out the good from the bad. And that is the WGA reserves the right to assert that exploitation of writer's material to train AI is prohibited by the MBA or other law. So this one might have some, I already know some lawyers that are looking at this to have it apply to basically any writer who has ever been a member of the union and has had their work produced, past, present, or future. Their work cannot be used to train an AI that is going to be used in the creative field for entertainment or the Hollywood industry. Meaning that if a tech company has a contract with, say, Disney, and they want to train AI into creating a revival series of Hogan's Heroes, and they want to use the original Hogan's Heroes television scripts and shows to train the AI, that content is prohibited from being used to create the follow-up show. So that means that any AI, any studio that wants to use an AI will have to use other source material to train the AI that is not affiliated with the WGA, past, present, or future, which means public domain stories, which means books that were written by authors who are not members of that union. All these other ancillary material could be used, but nothing that was made under a WGA writer. So that's also very fascinating. But here's the fun part. So this stipulation gives WGA writers, the opportunity to use AI. However, for those of you that might not be aware, every time you're using an AI program like a ChatGPT, whatever you input in there, that AI program uses as part of its training method. So that means that you, as a writer, if you're trying to rewrite a monologue and you put it into the AI, that becomes source material to train the AI, in which case you cannot use that, or the AI cannot be used in that at all. Which means that if you're a terrible writer that's been relying on AI up until this point, and you want to rewrite a scene or get a couple variations of your scene, that stuff that you've input into the AI is therefore training that AI, and that AI can now no longer be used for your work. So this is a very interesting argument that needs further exploration, I think, in the courts. And I think that's a pretty good win. And I can see why the strike probably lasted as long as it was, because it's basically putting up a lot of significant roadblocks to using AI. And we have Jane Theory, who we comically jest that she is an AI, and she says yes, that's right. So if I were a screenwriter and I'm trying to nail an ending to a screen and to a script, and I take my original written work and I put it into an AI to help me get a better ending, I have I have deliberately trained that AI, and now that whatever that AI has learned, it can no longer be used as an AI for the purposes of writing. However, if I were to use AI to ask it a question about something, um, such as maybe I want to learn certain details about life on the planet Neptune, or how the living conditions could be theoretically on the planet Neptune. That would then give me some general information that I can then take, use it for sources through a Google search or through normal scientific peer journals on theory and whatnot. And I can still use that to create my own material. And it doesn't fall under the stipulations of, number one, training AI, or number one, using AI as generated source, because it's really just, it's not actually a true source. It's really just kind of using it as what was an older term of like the semantic search. I'm using it essentially as a Google search, or I'm using it essentially as the computer in Star Trek. I'm asking it a question, it's pointing me in a direction, and then I'm collecting the data on my own, and I'm going to be using the data at my own discretion. So that is probably where it's going to go. Now, Jay makes a really good point. I think the enforcement will be the issue. It's going to be a contentious one. I most likely is going to see that, but yeah, it's going to be tricky. However, one of the things that we have been kind of noticing, especially with the visual side of AI, is that people have been kind of quick to point out the what is AI and what isn't, and it has nothing to do with the fact that the AI hasn't gotten fingers correct. There are other sort of tells happening right now, little uncanny valley stuff. Um, well, Davina raises a good point. None of the research has developed a methodology that can prove AI generated or assisted content. Um, well, not in the sense that it could pass, like, say, the Turing test, which is to convince you that the AI is actually human. But one of the things that has been kind of the big tell is how egregiously derivative AI is on the written side of things. There's nothing, there's no voice to it. And that's kind of the tell right now. So I think the rule of thumb is, at least within the WGA and the general writing community, if it seems like it was written by AI, we're probably going to give it the benefit of the doubt that it was, and just assume that for the case, and basically defend that accusation, and have the person also, defend that accusation as well, and we'll give them the benefit of the doubt in defending it at the same time. But I think it's going to be very difficult because, again, there's data trails. If you're using a computer and you do a quick check on their history to see what things they've used and see how they use it, especially with account recording, you could probably determine whether something is AI or not. But yeah, it's going to be interesting area of exploration in the near future. Absolutely. Um, Jane says the AI will begin training itself. It'll only get better. I feel like they're fighting an uphill battle. Um, if they do unlock a way for the AI to self-train, that would then preclude the singularity and self-awareness, and that would be very, very frightening indeed. Um, so yeah, well, that's what they ended up getting here on the AI side of things. I think this is a pretty decent roadblock for now. Um, I'm curious about how that could be circumvented within the next 3 years, and what areas that would be. So that's kind of last call with Troy Pacelli makes a great point. It's either AI generated or bad writing. Either way, it needs to be called out. Yes, absolutely. I think that's the case. And you know what? Some of the things that have been put in this contract actually allow or afford a more encouraging metric to write better. And so we'll get to some of that. So that's the basic stuff of the artificial intelligence. We have some improved terms for screenwriting employment. So this was actually a pretty significant win as well, especially given how many intellectual properties are being adapted by the studio system. So right now we have a guaranteed second step. So a second step is required whenever a writer is hired for a first draft of a screenplay for 200% of minimum or less, including original and, most importantly, non-original screenplays. The requirement also applies to spec purchases. So what this allows for is that if a writer out there writes an original screenplay that is not an adaptation or an assignment job script, they will get a second step offer to do a rewrite, and that's what the second step means. You get notes, you do a rewrite, you get paid for that. But it also allows you, if you're going in for a Marvel production or a Star Wars or whatever Warner Brothers is going to do, or Paramount or what have you, if you're going in for one of their assignment works and you turn in your first draft and they give you notes, you are guaranteed a second step to rewrite the notes, to rewrite based on those notes. So it allows you to still maintain a little bit of creative control and input, but it also better guarantees you're going to have your name as the principal credit on that screenplay, because you're given two opportunities to make it better in part of the deal with the studio. So it's not going to be, you're not going to see, well, you probably still are, but it makes it better directed to you that if you're writing something and it gets produced, it's going to be your name on the credits and not just your name, and six others divided by an to acknowledge rewrites and whatnot. So that's pretty good, because that means you as the original writer get a little bit more money. And if you are going to be rewritten, the studio is going to have to pay a little extra in order to do that, more than what they normally do. So it's probably going to be in their best interest to kind of keep the same writer on, unless it really isn't working out and they have to bring someone in. And that's usually a pretty decent sign, because there's nothing worse than having a good writer getting rewritten by a cheaper bad writer. So this helps out here. We also have some stipulations with regards to accelerated payment for the flat rates or flat deals. So a screenwriter hired on a flat deal basis of 200% of minimum or less must be paid 50% of their free fee on commencement. So that's kind of upfront. If the writer has not delivered within 9 weeks of commencement, 25% of the fee is payable upon the invoice. And then the final 25% is due on delivery of the step. So that means if the writer takes too long, they're not going to get their back end 50%. It's going to be split up between from the initial due date, and then you have to wait. You don't get that in the last 25% until you actually turn in your draft. So if it takes longer than 9 weeks, which can be the case for some writers, but not all, we try to pump out stuff and go through the process as quickly and efficiently as possible. So 9 weeks, a little over 2 months, that should be doable. We also have a cool thing with regards to streaming features. So when a feature-length project is made for streaming with a budget of $30 million or more, the minimum initial compensation for a story and teleplay is $100,000, an 18% increase from the current rate, and a 26% increase in the residual base. Combined with the foreign residual improvements described below, this results in a 3-year residual of $216,000 for projects on the largest services, a 49% increase from $144,993 under the 2020 MBA. So that means that if you are doing a feature film that's only going to be on a streaming service, you're still going to get some decent compensation as a result, because you're not going to be getting any gross points on that feature film by way of the method of distribution and streaming. However, this is your minimum basic. So if you can negotiate something more than that, this is a good starting point, I would say. So then we have improved terms for high budgeted subscription video on demand services, or video on demand videos, content. Sorry. So we have increased foreign streaming residuals. So foreign streaming residuals will now be based on the streaming service's number of foreign subscribers for services available globally, amounting to a 76% increase and including a 2.5 base increase to the foreign residual for the services with the largest global subscriber bases over 3 years. Excuse me. Sorry, had to sneeze. So, for instance, Netflix's 3-year foreign residual will increase from the current $18,684 for a 1-hour episode to $32,830. That is in regards to a Netflix original series or a streaming service original series. This does not apply to shows like The Office or Suits being purchased or licensed for Netflix distribution. That is going to have to be something pertaining to what the studio that is licensing out to with regards to residuals, not for Netflix or any other streaming services. So that's kind of that's a pretty interesting model to have. I think this model is probably going to be temporary because in the next section, we're going to see something a bit more in line to what I have been talking about for many years on this platform. So now we have a viewer-based streaming bonus. So the Guild negotiated a new residual based on viewership, made for HBS VOD series and films that are viewed by 20% or more of the service's domestic subscribers in the first 90 days of release, or in the first 90 days in any subsequent exhibition year. They get a bonus equal to 50% of the fixed domestic and foreign residual, with views calculated as hours streamed domestically of the season or film divided by the runtime. Uh, this is interesting because this actually encourages the writers to make sure they have the best show they possibly can, along with actors and directors and producers, because the more people they get to watch that, the higher return that 50% is going to be. So we can only cross our fingers and hope that they start doing some math while they're in the development stage and trying to actually give us, the audience, a show we really want to have. So that's something to consider. So, for instance, excuse me, projects written under the new MBA on the largest streaming services will receive a bonus of $9,031 for a half-hour episode, and a bonus of $16,415 for a 1-hour episode, or $40,500 for a streaming feature over $30 million in budget. The bonus structure will take effect for projects released on or after January 1st, 2024. So these are all performance-based bonuses with regards to the initial sale or payment of whatever project you're working on within the high budgeted streaming video on demand. Next, we also have streaming data transparency. This was a point of contention that the studios did not want to budge on, but they capitulated because the companies have agreed to provide the Guild, subject to a confidentiality agreement, the total number of hours streamed both domestically and internationally of self-produced high-budgeted streaming programs, example, a Netflix original series. The Guild may share information with the membership in aggregated form. So beforehand, the studios were willing to give the numbers to the Guild, but only to a very small committee, and those numbers would not be shared with the rest of the union members. That has changed. Now, if I or any other writer is writing an original series that's on a streaming platform and we want to see the numbers, we can get them. However, it's still subjected to a confidentiality agreement, which means that I or those writers probably can't share those numbers publicly without permission from the studio. But I still think that's a good step forward because it allows us as writers to see how well our show is performing and hopefully make adjustments to improve those numbers if they're not doing reaching the intended target. We also have premiums for pilot and backup scripts, which is 150% pilot premium and 115% backup script premium will now apply to programs made for the high budgeted streaming video on demand. Now we get into something that I think is going to end up becoming the norm in a few years, which is the minimum terms for advertising supported streaming, which is AVOD. And we also have FAST, which is for free ad supported. I can't remember what the T stands for, but it's for free ad supported streaming, essentially. So this is stuff you can find online that you don't have to subscribe to or with any sort of credit card or payment program. It's just there for you to browse. Excuse me. So high budgeted programs made for ad supported streaming services, including FAST, get the same initial compensation terms as the equivalent programs made for subscription streaming services, including network primetime script fees for the highest budgeted series, as well as protections like span using the basic cable span cap of $375,000 and premium rates for pilots and backup scripts. These programs will also receive a 2% residual for reuse on the AVOD service. So this is if I'm reading this correctly, and I haven't been corrected yet on it, this is essentially the network and cable model that I have been talking about on this channel and on other channels of where streaming will most likely go. It'll essentially be cable and network on demand that's ad supported and will allow you guys to get more traditional formatted shows at your own convenience. The appointment television days will start to phase out, and you make the appointment for what you're going to watch. So we'll see how that works here. So now we have increased compensation for series employment, weekly pay and staff writer script fees. So weekly pay increases. That goes to the 543.5 as under Article 14. So that's going to be the 3-year annual raises, increases with the contracts. We also have the writer producer weekly rates, which have gotten some significant increases. There will be a new writer producer tier, a co-producer level and above, that has a higher minimum weekly rate amounting to a 9.5% premium over the story editor, excuse me, an executive story editor rate. These rates will go into effect for the new seasons that start 60 days after ratification. Excuse me. I'm so sorry for that. And I'm sorry if I blew out your ears there. I tried to mute. It's not fast enough. So this basically means for the 2024 season, these rates will go into effect. When we take a look at the numbers here, it's 11,000 for up to 9 weeks for 9 weeks of employment, 9,000 between 10 and 19 weeks, and 8,000 for 20 plus weeks. If you do the quick math here, this guy here, you're going to be making more money overall for your working time. Compared to these two tiers where you will still be making some significant cash, but it's not going to be as much as this one if you're working more than 20 weeks. So that's not bad. Those are pretty good for California wages. Keep in mind, guys, this may be the minimum agreement that can apply to all writers, but the writers still have to get the job. And guess what? It's lucky if there's 10% of the writers working at any given time. And if you're only working 9 weeks out of the year, $11,000 over 9 weeks is pretty tight to live on in the state of California. So it's better than nothing, but it's not very sustainable. You have to hope that there's a lot of things in production to justify them to keep working in 9-week pockets throughout the year. We have development room premiums. So this is for writers of any title working in pre-greenlit rooms of at least 3 writers, including a pre-greenlit room between seasons of a show. It will be paid a premium rates of up to guarantees of 19 weeks. If writers are guaranteed 20 weeks or more, then the premium doesn't apply. So if they're working for longer terms, they don't get the premium. And the development room rates will be 25% above the highest regular room rate. These rates will go into effect for new contracts beginning November 1st, 2023, assuming ratification in October. So this goes into something I had been suspicious about and mentioned on Midnight's Edge a couple of times. And that is, I suspected that as part of the negotiations for the WGA, given how many writers despise the mini room, they have essentially tried to price it out of what the studios would want to do by having a 20-week or more. By having a guaranteed 20 weeks, you're trying to match a traditional network and cable writer's room. And you're also increasing the cap on the expense for that to the point where you're essentially suggesting, hey, you can do a mini room, or you could save some money and just do a traditional writing room that actually goes already beyond 20 weeks and maybe even goes beyond the minimum 6 episodes required, which means you might get a series order saying we are intending to do a 22 episode season, but we're going to produce the first 13 and see how that plays. And if that plays, we're going to give you your back 9. That's my theory. And it appears that's the case, given the fact that they basically say the development room rates will be 25% above the highest regular room rate. So which is going to be financially beneficial to the studios? Pay 25% to do a mini room, or save 25% to do the traditional room that the writers actually are in favor of doing anyways? Basic math here. I think that's the strategy that they did, and I would not be surprised if in 3 years the studios will basically say, let's just get rid of the mini room in the next contract and not even bring it up again, and we'll just stick to the normal formula that has worked well for the last 60 odd years. And I think that's a kind of a clever tactic, if I'm right. I don't know. Again, it's just a theory. We'll have to see how that plays out over the course of this contract. So these premiums provide staff writers for an extra $6,900 for the year one, almost $13,000 for year two, and $14,214 for all these for year one for these different tiers. My mistake. Again, I haven't been slept much since Friday, so I apologize for that. But I really appreciate you all sticking with me for this coverage for you guys. We also see that staff writer script fees. So this is pretty cool. So staff writers must be paid script fees for the episodes they write. So there's no your regular duties aren't just rewriting someone else. If you end up doing a rewrite of someone else, or you end up getting assigned a script, you are going to be paid an additional script fee on top of your normal weekly rate. Excuse me. So we have staffing and duration provisions for episodic series. So development rooms, aka pre-greenlit rooms, and regular writers' rooms for television and high-budgeted streaming videos on demand series will now have requirements regarding the minimum number of writers who must be hired and the duration of their employment. These new provisions go into effect for seasons where the first episode is written after December 1st, 2023, assuming ratification in October. Development rooms are once 3 writers are convened before a series order, at least 3 writer-producers, including the showrunner, are guaranteed 10 consecutive weeks of employment. Development rooms, where writers are guaranteed 20 weeks of work or more, are treated as post-greenlit rooms. For these rooms on first season shows, the minimum staff size required will be 3 writer-producers, including the showrunner. For these rooms in the second or subsequent season of a show, the required minimum number of writers is determined by the anticipated episode order. Post-greenlit rooms, the following requirements are triggered depending on the number of episodes ordered, unless a single writer is engaged in all episodes. So this is a very important part of the sentence, unless a single writer is engaged to write all episodes. In the case where there's going to be a single writer engaged on all episodes, most likely would be a writer that is getting a series that is going to be high budgeted streaming on demand or regular writer's room for television, but it's something that they have already put forth themselves and was not part of the development room or the pre-lit green room or the mini room. So that means that if I'm interpreting that correctly, and I think I am, that means that if you or I write a pilot that gets purchased, it is not subjected to the minimum staffing number, which means that if you need your writers to help you do it, you hire who you hire, and you have to, of course, negotiate with who you're hiring with the studios. Or if you're like a J. Michael Straczynski with your Babylon 5, you can probably do your own show and not have to worry about the minimum staffing because it's not through a contract or a room set up by the studio. You've brought them a product that they are purchasing and doing, and it's your show to do with as you please. In the case here where the studios are trying to create something in their own pocket, they want the studios to say, if you're going to create it on your own, you're going to hire at least 3 writers to get it made. You're not going to exploit a single individual and overload them with whatever show you want. They're going to have a team. And in this case here, for episodes that are 6 or fewer, minimum requirement is 3 writers. If it goes 7 to 12, minimum is 5. 3 of those writers will be writers-producers. And if it's 13 episodes or more through these development progress, minimum of 6, 3 of those being writer-producers. So again, this looks like to me the Guild trying to make it very inconvenient for studios to approach development rooms and pre-greenlit rooms as a means to create shows. So that's kind of interesting. Says, seems like writing by committee. You'll have to elaborate on that because I don't know where you're coming from there, John. But yeah. So let's see here. The minimum staff must be guaranteed at least 20 weeks or the entire duration of the post-greenlit room, whichever is shorter. Excuse me, if there was a development room, the two writer producers who worked in the development room must be hired for the writer's room. Weeks worked in the development room can be credited against the guaranteed weeks in the writer's room, but the development room compensation cannot be credited. So that means if you are guaranteed 20 weeks working and it took you 10 weeks to develop the show, you're paid for those 10 weeks and they are used as part of the overall 20 weeks. However, the payment that you earned in that 10 weeks will not be subtracted from the remaining 10 weeks of your contract to go into the actual writer's room. So kind of also makes sure that the people who created the show initially are there to see it through to actual production, which is pretty cool. Again, still don't like the compelled writing minimum staffing stuff, but it seems here that they're trying to make this method more expensive than the traditional one we have had up until this point. Writers in production for single camera series made by the high budgeted streaming video on demand and pay TV that are exclusively filmed in the United States and Canada, two writer producers must be employed for the lesser of 20 weeks of production or the duration of production along with the showrunner. The two writer positions can be used for more than two writers, provide that the total weeks worked by the additional writers adds up to the minimum required number for each position. So that's a little wordy, but it basically creates a little sense of job security. However, one thing that is important to note is that at no point does this say you can't terminate them and get new writers in if they suck. So John is saying, script doctor, for how many writers are in the room to make decisions on a certain plot point? Well, the decision is always going to be made by the showrunner. The concept of the writer's room is that you pitch ideas and you break a show. And if you're the showrunner and you're selecting the writers that you want in your room, you're basically selecting the type of people that are going to contribute and build with you, as opposed to fighting over how a show is going to be done. So yeah, it's not so much by committee. And at no point do we have anything in here saying that the studio is authorized to control the writer's room, because in the far more detailed minimum basic agreement contract, it defines what a showrunner is and how much the power the showrunner has when it comes to the minimum requirements of the room. So that is something to consider. So we'll just see what happens here. So let's see what we have going on here. So we have improved options, exclusivity, and span protections. So the salary limit under which options and exclusivity protections apply will increase from $325,000 to $350,000 as of May 2nd, 2024. Span protections will be expanded to cover more writers working on short orders by increasing the cap on earnings from $400,000 to $450,000. Basic cable remaining $375,000. And by extending span protection to writers on limited series for contracts made 30 days after the ratification date. Span, I keep forgetting some of the details of span, but I think span is basically if you're working for a little bit over 2.5 weeks on a show, you are then given protection and assurances with regards to pay. God, it's been a long time since I had to deal with span stuff. So I apologize if I'm forgetting anything on that. If you guys out there even care about that part, I do want to try and be as informed and convey that to you as much as possible while I can. So here's one that's going to be kind of also a double-edged sword with regards to late night, because we all know how great that has been over the last few years. So point 12, Appendix A series made for subscription streaming services. So comedy, variety, quiz, and audience or other non-dramatic programs with budgets at or above $600,000 for a half hour or $1.15 million for an hour, 1 hour show that are made for subscription streaming services will have weekly initial compensation minimums like television. Projects with 4 episodes per week have lower breaks. For instance, comedy variety strip shows have budget breaks for $150,000 for 30 minutes and $250,000 for 60 minutes. Comedy variety series employment will get the aggregate minimum compensation in addition to weekly minimums. Comedy variety series with 13 programs will get 13 weeks guarantees. 13-week guarantees. Shorter orders may have shorter guarantees by applying for a guild waiver. Quiz and audience and other non-dramatic series have weekly minimums through 13-week guarantees are not required. The guild has the right to negotiate initial compensation terms and residuals for existing daytime serials that move to subscription streaming services in the same fashion as it negotiates for Appendix A and low-budget dramatic shows on basic cable. All high-budget Appendix A programs will receive a residual of 1.2% of the licensing fee for use after the first 26 weeks. This is getting more into the network and cable model things when it comes to streaming. So we're getting close to something that's a bit more stable. Let's see. Yeah, so we have the showrunner training program. So for those of you unaware, the WGA West, WGA East has a showrunner training program. So if you are a promising young writer, you get invited into the showrunner training program. This allows you to get your feet wet in a less consequence environment, so that in the eventuality that you do become a showrunner, you have the tools at your disposal to do that well with as few mistakes as possible. So while the investment is there, it all depends on who's going to be running the program, and are they going to be making good showrunners, or are they going to be making some of the poorer ones we have seen in a few of our programs. I really hope it's for the former, not the latter. The WGA is actually going to be replacing 3 of the arbitrators for claims made in Los Angeles on who has credit on scripts that are being written. So it's nice to get some new perspectives in there. I can't remember how long the previous ones have served. I don't think I've ever had to stand before those ones. It's been a little over 10 years since I had to do arbitration, I think. Granted, but maybe less, around the 10-year mark at least. Then we have the Tri-Guild Audit Program. I can't remember this, but I think this has to do with DGA, WGA, and SAG, but I could be wrong. I don't have much experience dealing with Tri-Guild situations, so I apologize for that. And then closing off the summary, before we get into some of the cooler aspects of what was asked and what was given, we have the other changes. We agreed to increase the number of episodes on new made for broadcast series that can get a single free promotional run from 2 to 3, but with the number of episodes capped at no more than 25% of the season. We agreed that the companies can exhibit a long-form program made for high-budgeted streaming videos on demand in theaters for not more than 8 days, at least 40 days after the program's released on the original streaming platform, for 3% of accountable receipts. So if there is a feature film that is premieres on Max, after 40 days, it can go into theaters for under a week, and you as a writer will receive 3% receipt compensation for whatever money is accumulated in that new distribution window. They also agreed to a 3% increase in the threshold for payment of the 1.2% residual for foreign free television reuse. So if your television show is being streamed somewhere else, you get a little increase there. We also agreed to allow a company to credit a sole writer, director, or writer-producer of a project as produced by or presented by in publicity releases or advertising without a separate writing credit. And then we've also agreed that interest isn't due when writers haven't provided the information necessary to process payment. So if you don't give them a void check on time, they don't have to. The studios aren't going to have to pay interest on what they owe you. So it's your responsibility, writers out there, that when you make a deal, all the accounting is in order so that you get paid on time. And I think that's a pretty fair thing for responsibilities. So let's. This is the tentative agreement summary. So we get to see some of the history here. Before I do that, I want to acknowledge Paul M., who has super chatted £5. Thank you so much, Paul. He says, love your knowledge on the new gods. Keep up the good work, my man. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Greatly appreciated. Let's see. He says, script doctor, for how many writers there are in a writer's room to make decisions on a... Oh, I already addressed that. I apologize. John Doe says, wait, everything is shifting to the UK for that tasty government kickbacks. This doesn't apply to those productions. Well, unless you are a union member. So again, even if they're filming over in the UK, if they're hiring union writers here, in Canada and the US, and also union actors and directors, them going to the UK makes no difference. However, if they set up production shops in the UK, whatever the UK contracts are with regards to their unions will be applied to those studios. And one thing to remember is that it doesn't matter where they're shooting, there's always going to be tax credits back. There's also going to be pre-sales done from other countries and foreign markets to help pay for those productions. So there's not really a significant type of loophole to exclude WGA or SAG-AFTRA or DGA members from future productions. So if there was something of an issue of that nature, it would have been brought up and addressed many, many, many years ago, because movies have been Hollywood has been making movies, filming in countries all over the world since it started. So nothing to worry about there. Let's see what else you guys have. Fractal Brain says, so does that mean that all shows will have a showrunner now? I also assume you mean instead of the recently invented term head writer. Yes, it appears that way. Based on this agreement, based on what I've been able to read with my foggy, sleep-deprived brain, it appears that if they're going to be making a show, you have to have a legitimate showrunner. You cannot assign an in-house producer as a showrunner, as what has been defined in the most recent minimum basic agreement. So yeah, it looks like, yes, the responsibilities will be part of a writer who is actually a writer to be the showrunner. And it essentially means that someone in a position like a Kevin Feige will no longer be the showrunner, showrunner in the background for these shows, but actually a writer will be there. Now, Kevin Feige will still have a great deal of influence and control over the projects that he's making, but it's going to be mostly on the shoulders of the showrunner and whatever team they form, guiding and trying to meet those goals, as opposed to it being a far more dictatorship thing, at least. Excuse me. We'll have to see exactly how it plays out over on the Disney side of things. When it comes to the rest of the studios and networks, I don't think anyone's really going to notice any change, because they're not the ones that are doing the weird head writer pseudo television streaming thing over there. Again, one thing you can note, take a look at Netflix, take a look at Paramount Plus and Max and the television shows that they put out. All of the runtimes per episode are far more consistent compared to anything that Disney has put out, where their shows range from 20 minutes to 35 minutes to 44 minutes to 55 minutes and all over the place. It's very odd. And they're the only ones that I have seen right now that do it. If there are other shows out there that do it, let me know, because I want to see that as well. The introspect M. So you're reinforcing my suspicions, and I agree with this. So history of union minimum hiring requirements that aren't tied to safety have proven to generally lead to a more expensive, lower quality results, because it leads to a dilution of accountability. Yes. In other words, if the writers hate their mini rooms, what's the best way to destroy them? Compelled hiring. Granted, I don't agree with that method, but if they want to get rid of writers' rooms, that's a good way. Sorry, the mini rooms and the pre-greenlit rooms, that's a good way to do it. And as far as I can tell with this contract, and hopefully I'll get some more clarification, the minimum staffing element requirements are not pertaining to traditional network or cable television shows. As far as I can tell, based on the readings of these terms, if the studios are the ones that build the mini rooms, and if they're going to build the mini rooms, it's going to cost them a pretty penny. And so I think this is a method to try and discourage building the mini rooms, because they haven't been proven very useful for content creation, and it also has been very useful for stability of income for writers or actors or directors. So you're very correct in that. So there we go. Let's see. Anything else you guys want to say? Wow, there's over 75 of you out there listening. Thank you so much, guys, for being here. We're going to go through this. This is only 7 pages. I'm only going to go through some of the basic points, because some of these have already been addressed. All the stuff that's highlighted in green is part of the tentative agreement, but we're going to take a look at the proposal that was made on the 1st of May, and then the AMPTB's counteroffers. And one thing that I think is of important to note is how much the studios capitulated to the unions. So the union wanted 6%, 5%, and 5% over 3 years for their minimums. The studios offered 4, 3, and 2. And what the unions end up getting is 5, 4, and 3.5. And this 5, 4, 3.5 was probably what they originally wanted in the first place. Because again, when you negotiate, you try to get, you ask for more, hoping to get your target. And it looks like that's the case here. We also see that they have an offer with streaming features with a budget of $12 million or more receive full theatrical terms, including better initial compensation. What ended up here is they offered for the studio did a counteroffer saying for made for streaming programs at 96 minutes with a budget of $40 million or more will receive 9% increase. What they ended up agreeing to is that made for feature VOD programs at 96 minutes with a budget of $30 million. So the studios lost $10 million on a buffer there. Will receive an 18%, so that's double increase in it to initial compensation with $100,000 for story and teleplay and a 26% increase in the residual base combined with the foreign residuals, all these details. That's a pretty significant gain compared to what was initially offered here. So that's something to take note. Then we have the second step stuff, which the studios rejected, and now they have capitulated to. We have the weekly pay, which was an increase of 50%, and then a total of 250% for is applies if the writer is paid less than 250%, 50% above minimum. They rejected and refused to make a counter. What ended up happening? The accelerated payment schedule has a 50% pay up front, just like what they asked. 25% pay 9 weeks after, and 25% pay on delivery, and applies if a writer is paid 200% of minimum or less. So the union said, okay, we'll knock off 50%, and we'll knock off 50 out of the 250%. So that's a pretty established win there. All the other stuff we kind of went over through the tentative agreement. When we're scrolling through here, the only thing that the union didn't get was a MBA weekly minimums during post. So this is essentially allowing the writers to stay on board during production and post-production, to see the show to completion to make sure it's all in nice working order and ready for broadcast. The studios rejected that, and the guild will then continue to pursue arbitration claims for any writer not paid weekly minimums during post. So this is now going to be up to a case-by-case basis. So this is the one thing that the union was not able to get out of all the other items that were proposed. We already have stuff that was agreed initially at the start of the negotiations. We have here agreed. We have viewership-based streaming bonuses, which they wanted to find out what a good residual program. The studio said, screw you, we're not doing it. And what happened later this September? We got a model that seems to be in the right direction. And we'll see how well that plays out in the future. We have increases to pension. We have increases to health. We then have the regulation of artificial intelligence, which the studios flat out rejected. And now we have here, regulate use of artificial intelligence on MBA covered projects. AI generated written material is not considered literary material. And we've gone over that. And basically what we have here is their initial proposal was $429 million a year. They offered $86 million. Turns out what they got is $233 million a year. It's a little over half of what was done, but I probably think this was more of the actual area they were trying to go for in the first place. Of course, in a perfect world, the Writers Guild would get the $429 million a year, but I still think this is a pretty solid contract overall. And given when you look at the middle column, how many stuff was rejected and then how much of it was actually eventually agreed to on the terms of the union, there are significant gains here. And as I stated on other channels, this type of negotiation really was kind of unprecedented. They had a person who was very good with research analysis, understanding patterns, was also being mentored for 5 years as a head negotiator anyways. That's Alan Strutzman. Given what we have here, along with Chris Kreiser and David A. Goodman leading the negotiating team, and the fact that it looks like it's having some positive impact and positive reception from majority of the writers on social media, seems like it might have been considered a good win. So John Cipolla has asked a question. He says, I have to ask, can you explain how writers' rooms actually work? All we hear about are the number of writers. What that does not explain is how many writers are committed to an episode. Okay, so generally speaking, in a writer's room, average writers' rooms are usually between 3 and 6 people for your traditional network hour-long drama show. Sometimes with comedies, you get a little bit more because, again, you need more people to tell as many jokes as possible. Not everyone can do a joke a minute or a joke or 2 jokes a page. It's a little tricky, so you kind of have to broaden out a little bit more. But really what happens is that you have the showrunner at the head, who they have the concept. They probably worked on the show Bible, and they break down the episodes that they have to order. It's usually breaking down the season. So in the case of a traditional show, it'd be breaking down the first 13 episodes. So a premise is the pilot is usually already written. They've already read it. They're familiar with it. They might go into production with that, or they might rewrite it. It all depends on the situation. But everybody in the room starts pitching ideas for episodes, how they're going to take characters, what direction, and whatnot. And it's basically just a collaborative effort. Everybody's throwing out ideas. The ones that resonate or see the most potential get thrown up on the whiteboard, and they start breaking down what the direction of the season is going to go over those first 13 episodes. Once that is figured out, and that can usually take a couple of days or weeks, what happens next is some of the people that pitch some of their ideas might get assigned to write the episode containing those ideas. So that it might either be an individual or a pair. And then they go off to write their episode, and then they come back. Now, while those things are being assigned, what's also happening is a shooting schedule is being arranged as well. So with the shooting schedules, they're looking at weather, they're looking at locations, and they're looking at budgets. So if you are writing an episode and it's going to be third in production, that gives you a little bit more time than the people who are writing it for the second. That's the second episode that's in production, and of course, rewrite of the pilot. But usually you're just working on a schedule to kind of turn it in. In addition, once you do turn it in as a team, it then goes to the showrunner and the showrunner's assistant. They check it over to see if it fits in line with their vision of the show. They will make adjustments, or they'll send notes for rewrites. Sometimes they'll do it themselves. Sometimes their assistant will do it, but it has a little bit of a back and forth. Once you have finished that episode, you're probably going to be assigned another episode to do later on the schedule. Usually in writing pairs, sometimes in singles, but that's typically how it is. And it kind of keeps you working steadily throughout the production. And then on top of that, once that script is then approved by the showrunner, it goes up to the network or the cable provider. They have their notes, and then it goes back down for rewrites and so forth. That is generally how a writer's room works. If you want to see it a bit more in a more detailed approach, there is a documentary called What We Left Behind. It's by Ira Stephen Bear. It talks about Deep Space Nine. There's a wonderful section there where they do essentially a writer's room where they break down what would the 8th season of Deep Space Nine be. And you see it's a small writer's room. I think there's only like 5 of them in there. And they're throwing out ideas. And it's a great example of the type of environment that you get when you're breaking a season down and getting into the nitty-gritty of the episodes. So I hope, John, that gives you some more insight into what goes on in a writer's room. So we have Lily Von Stoop here, who says, so the thing they lost to see a project to completion. Please explain that outcome and what that means for the project. So the thing they lost to see. Okay. So the thing they lost was basically traditionally on network television. And I think this still holds through because as far as I tell, that stipulation only pertains to pre-greenlit rooms, mini rooms, or streaming services. But traditionally, your showrunner or whoever wrote the episode would first go on set while it's being filmed and address any issues that pop up during that time. Then, Once it's been filmed and it's done, all the ADR, all the second unit stuff is done. It all goes into editing. The editor and the director do their cut, and then the showrunner or the person or persons that wrote that episode will also go into the editing bay, see the process, talk with the director, see what type of how they're finalizing the vision of the episode, and they will learn the relationship and things that the editor requires, that the director requires, and those lessons, those experiences will inform them on how to write future stories to address any of the questions or issues or problems that they have to solve there. So you're basically trying to make it so that you're learning what these jobs are requirements are, so that when in your writing process, you're making it easier for them to do their job as best and efficiently as possible. And the fewer writers you get to share in that experience to understand what's going on there, the more likely you're putting more stress and more workload on those units when you could actually be learning what they're doing as well and alleviating that pressure so that they can just make the best show they can. Um, it also allows the writer to explore other areas. They might want to get into editing in between gigs as a writer, or they might want to get into directing in between gigs as a writer. That is a way for them to learn and share the experiences of production. It also allows them better to budget things. So if that writer eventually becomes a showrunner, they will understand how many hours, how much work it's going to be required for the editors and directors and the rest of the crew to get an episode made. And the more you distance the writers from taking part in that area of production, the less likely they're going to improve as writers and as producers and as creatives in that field. And it's going to end up hurting the business overall. It's going to have a ripple effect. So that is going to be something that I think will be brought up again during the next negotiations as part of the minimum basic agreement. There's nothing prohibiting in the term or agreement for a showrunner that's experienced enough, that has a little bit of sway and clout, to be able to get that on their own show for their writing staff. Like, again, this is the minimum basic agreement. This is the starting point. So if you've got some decent credits and popularity behind you, and you want to do a television show and you want your writer staff to be part of the production and post-production process, there's a good chance you can negotiate that in your terms for the show. And those writers and your show and those writers will benefit from those types of terms. So that's really what the Seeing Project to the End is all about. So I hope that answers your question, Lily von Stupp. A minimum in writer staffing, says John Ware Jr., for projects and increase in pay doesn't mean the number of greenlit projects won't decrease. Correct. Doesn't mean it won't. Doesn't mean it won't increase either. But the whole idea when it comes to the mini rooms is to try and say, hey, if you want to do a mini room, it's going to cost you extra. But if you want to just, hire a writer or take in a spec script for a pilot, or do it more of an assignment job where it's like just write a pilot and then we'll test it to see if it works and then determine a show out of that, that could be more cost efficient for the studios, and also with that model allow for a more competent and merit-based writers room with longer working conditions than with the mini room, which is essentially trying to compress the development and creation of a television series, or in this case specifically a streaming series, in a less than 3-month period. And we're talking from conception to breaking the story, to filling in all the scripts, getting them into draft ready, to getting notes from the producers and turning in the final thing, and then it being taken away from them, going into directors, and then going into the edit bay, and all compressed in a shorter time. Where traditionally doing a 6-episode miniseries or a 13-episode miniseries would really be around 12 to 23 weeks of work, because you want to have that extra time to make sure that you're giving the studio and by as a byproduct the audience the best thing you can. So we will see. We'll see what happens there with that. And before we go, I'm going to share with you guys a little snippet of the actual minimum basic agreement contract. As you can see up here, it's 94 pages long. A few of those pages really are just listing the signatories and where you'd sign to agree for it. But here we have Article 14, Again, this can be found at the WGA contract2023.org website. It's publicly accessible, so you can peruse it yourself. We're going to do this thing, this brief part here, answer your questions, and then call it. And you guys can go head over to Midnight's Edge for Midnight's Edge in the morning. Let's see. I'll probably be on that show. I'm gonna have to take a quick break. So we'll do that. If there's anyone out there in the chat with a link to the Midnight's Edge in the Morning show, please throw it in there. Mods, much greatly appreciated. So this is Article 14, Section M, with regards to staffing. It says, for a series, serial, or multi-part closed-ended series for which the order is 6 episodes or fewer episodes for the season, or 6 or fewer parts as applicable, company shall engage a showrunner as defined in Article 14L above, and at least 2 writers also employed in additional capacities under Article 14K, other than story editors, executive story editors in the writer's room. So this is basically saying if the company wants to make a mini room with 6 or fewer episodes, the company is required to get a showrunner and hire at least 2 writers. Remember, this is part of the company. So this language here doesn't say that you or I could pitch a pilot and have to have a minimum staffing thing. As far as I understand, again, I want to get clarification on that. But so far, the wording seems to say that if the studio is trying to make a mini room or a pre-greenlit room, these are the terms of that room. So if the order is for more than 6 episodes for the season or parts as applicable, but fewer than 13, the company shall also engage 2 additional writers of any level, i.e. any writer also employed in additional capacities under Article 14K or writers employed under Article 13B7S, for a total of 5 writers, including the showrunner. If the order is for 13 or more episodes for the season or parts as applicable, the company shall also engage 3 additional writers of any level for a total of 6 writers, including the showrunner. Each of those writers shall be engaged for a period of at least 20 weeks, but not to exceed the duration of the writer's room. If the writer's room is convened following the close of a development room for the same project, then at least 2 writers also employed in additional capacities under Article 14K, other than the story editors and executive story editors, must be writers who are employed in the development room, if available, and the 20-week period of employment referenced in the preceding sentence may include weeks in which the writer was employed in the development room. Excuse me. The showrunner shall be responsible for the selection of such writers. However, the showrunner selection shall be subject to the company's approval. So this is really important. This means that if, for instance, a studio wants to do a mini room and they hire a competent, good showrunner, they're most likely going to be selecting the best writers that they know and want to work with. So that seems like it might be a better benefit in quality. However, it's not a guarantee, mind you, but it is a better direction than what we've had before. It goes on to say, no payment is owed for any week in which the writer does not perform any services for the company between the close of the development room and the commencement of such writer services in the writer's room, or during a hiatus, or when the writer is voluntarily absent for personal or professional reasons. So this means if at any point the writer is scheduled not to show up, they don't get paid for that week. So that shows a little bit of responsibility, and it's not just a free ride. So that's something to take note. However, it could be a free ride in another part where they're just brought in and not doing anything. Again, it's up to the showrunner's discretion at this point. In no event shall the span provisions of Article 14K 14K2 include any period before the commencement of such writer's services in the writer's room. In the event a writer engaged under the minimum staffing requirements of this paragraph M voluntarily resigns prior to completion of the writer's guarantee, the company must replace the resigning writer unless 2 or fewer weeks remain on the resigning writer's guarantee. The company shall endeavor to replace the resigning writer within 2 weeks. The replacement writer shall be guaranteed the number of weeks remaining on the resigning writer's guarantee. Less the number of weeks intervening between the resigning writer's last day of employment and the replacement writer's first day of employment, but not to exceed 2 weeks. This paragraph M is effective for any season or series or serial for which the literary material for the first episode of the season is written on or after date of ratification. The paragraph M does not apply when a single writer or team of writers is employed to write all episodes. So this goes back to what I suspect, which means I don't think this has anything to do with your traditional method of pitching and producing a television show. I think this is primarily with regards to the formation of the mini room that the studios have brought into effect. So that's basically it. Uh, that's what it's looking like right now, and I think this is a fair, solid agreement. I'm sure when I get a proper night's sleep and my mind starts to reanalyze this, I might be able to pick apart some issues that might be of note. But so far, it looks like it's kind of okay. Um, so let's see what we got here. Uh, John Sapola says, so it's like brainstorming. Yes. That's where it starts. It's like brainstorming. And then once the brainstorming is done, you start refining it. You outline, you execute, you workshop, and go and go and go. There may be sort of story beats that are followed, but there's usually a lot of flexibility in how to execute those as best as possible for the purposes of the show. Um, and in some cases, yeah, you have a producer or studio head that comes in and they will be like a helicopter parent or a bulldozer parent telling you exactly what it is they want. And you as writers have to figure out a way to execute that in the best possible way that will resonate with an audience. It's not an easy thing to do. A lot of writers fail at it because sometimes those notes or those demands don't fit in line with what the premise of the show is. And one of the key rules of writing is never betray your premise. So, and if your premise isn't working, get a new premise. So let's see here. So Clone Geek says, terrible news. The late night talk shows come back October 2nd. I hear you. They're not what they used to be. I really do miss the days of Johnny Carson and David Letterman and Conan O'Brien. Those guys were a lot of fun and clever, and they did what worked well for them and worked well for audiences. The Introspect M says, it seems to me that for the health of the profession, the WGA should be sponsoring their own apprenticeship programs outside of the studio contract as a benefit for membership. Do they? Technically, they do. The studios, in this case here, for the showrunner program, the studios give them $250,000 to do that. The other way, so the way that the union also works is that if you're working on a television show, you are basically, and you're starting as a writer, you're basically under a mentorship program as well. That's usually how it works. Also, one of the things that's actually kind of very endearing about the writers in Hollywood is that we all like to talk. We all like to share things that we have learned, especially if we're in a confident enough position where we know it's not going to cost us a potential job. I know a lot of writers, I myself have consulting services. This is to help other writers. I get some money from doing that because I have my rates that I charge. But at the same time, it helps make all of us better. If I can inspire another writer to really up their game and they put out something that's great and that thing inspires me, that benefits me from helping them and vice versa. And there's a lot of that camaraderie in Hollywood when it comes to the writers, because all we want to do is impress each other because we've seen past the magic. We see how it works, and it doesn't always have that same pizzazz that we had when we were younger that wanted us to get into this industry. But every once in a while, if you can help shepherd a writer or know a writer that is able to make you reconnect with that original feeling again, you'll like them. You wish you were the one that did it. And because they did it as well, it might inspire you to be able to do the same thing and for them. And that's kind of a really cool aspect here. Um, um, Oh, Paul's in the chat. He says, what does it improve over previous agreement? Why is it better? That's a pretty good question. Well, for starters, we get some clarification with regards to residuals for a streaming model. Mostly it's overall increased pay. That's one of the things that makes it pretty good. And as I mentioned before, it looks like the problem of the mini room is being addressed by way of trying to make it more expensive to have a mini room. So I think that's an improvement as well for now. We also have another great improvement because there's so much IP out there. So for instance, all those Marvel films, those are assignment films. If you get hired on that beforehand, you didn't get a chance to rewrite it if it got notes. Now you do. So that's a pretty good progression to the previous agreement. So theoretically speaking, if I were to write a She-Hulk film, I am guaranteed the first rewrite of that from their notes, and I will be paid for that first rewrite. Where beforehand, if I wrote the first She-Hulk film, I would not be guaranteed anything. They could go to another writer, negotiate their price, and then they would rewrite me. In which case, I might also end up losing credit on that script for residuals. So now I've got 2 rewrites under my belt with this agreement. Better chance of them not needing another writer to come in. Of course, that's always based on taste. It's not guaranteed, but at least I get 2 paychecks out of that as opposed to just one on the assignment side of things. So I think that's a pretty good increase. We also got increases on pension and healthcare fund as well. We got money to continue the show running program, which is pretty good. Yeah, so far I think it's pretty solid. And the other part too, and you'll like this, Paul, is that for the free ad-supported tier of shows, it uses the traditional network model of streaming, which means it needs viewership. You need to see the viewership numbers to justify its continuation on that platform. And on top of that, the one thing we didn't have before is the WGA now has access, by albeit confidentiality is a stipulation, but they now have access to the numbers of their shows via an aggregate. And it's not just a small subcommittee in the WGA. Every union member has access to it now. The only stipulation is that they cannot publicly share it without permission from the studio. So that means that the writers of their shows are going to start seeing the numbers of those shows almost in real time, I would assume. But they're actually going to see the numbers of their shows, how well it's performing and how well it's not. And I think that'll be pretty cool. So yeah, that's about it. That's pretty much all I've got right now. I'm going to drink a lot of water, pace around a little bit, see what happens later, see what sort of talks are going to be made over on Midnight's Edge after dark. And yeah, that's it for me. Introspect M says, with so many members, I'm not sure how they're going to keep those numbers from getting leaked. Not that I have a problem with that. Yeah, I know, right? Well, here's the other part too. If the numbers are bad, I think the writers are probably not going to want to leak them. But if the numbers are great, I think they're probably going to want to leak them too. Chado says, good job. See you in a few minutes. Well, thank you, sir. Yeah, I'll probably see you in a few minutes. Mark Cotier says, I couldn't catch the earlier part of the stream. What was the decision on AI? Okay, briefly summarize it. AI is pretty much prohibited. And it cannot impede or circumvent a writer's credit or pay when it comes to writing. And union written work cannot be used to train AI in the creative field. So it's a lot of roadblocks with regards to AI. So that's the basics there. I hope that answers your questions. If not, just swing on back to about an hour from now an hour ago in the stream. I do go over some of that as well. In the meantime, guys, I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope to see a bunch of you guys over on Midnight's Edge. Before I go, I want to just let you know our good buddy Tom Conkle has now got 100 backers on his Island in the Stars feature film. They are at 18% of their total funding for so 12 grand out of 66,000. If you are desperately hungry for a fun science fiction adventure with an interesting cast of characters and a compelling story about the importance of family and friendship, this is something that will fulfill that hunger and probably make you want more. So consider checking it out. I have gonna put the link in the chat. It's gonna take a minute here. So because again, I'm ahead of you guys on this recording. Please feel free to check it out. Share the link. And yeah, that's all I've got for now. I can't wait to see you guys later. And thank you for allowing me to entertain you on the minutia of guild policy and guild contracts. Darius says, I appreciate your breakdowns on the strike. It really helps to understand the situation without all the union studio hatred in the YouTube community. Hey man, no union. Listen, I only know one union that's perfect, and it's in the medical field. And yeah, it would be great if other unions operate like that. A lot of people have a lot less contention with unions, but sadly they don't. So yeah, no. And in general, especially in the entertainment industry, no union is perfect, but maybe it can get better. And it also doesn't prohibit individual negotiations, which is even best. And the other part too about the WGA, unlike other unions, you have to keep working if you want to remain inside it. It's not a free ride. So that is all for me. Thank you again, everybody. Have a wonderful day. And until next time, never forget, when it comes to great story, it all starts with the script.